The Three Fates, written by Aisha Urooj, narrated by Alyssa Kane. Copyright Aisha Urooj, 2023. The world fears them, for they possess the power to shape destinies. Lachesis, Clotho, and Atropos. Yet, what truly strikes fear into the heart of one of the three fates? Her own sisters. The weaver, Lachesis, has fallen in love with a mortal and is terrified her other siblings will find out. What is thicker than blood? Could it be love? Or does family and duty triumph over everything else? Who is the mysterious stranger that has captured her mind and soul? Even Lachesis isn't sure. She hopes the inflexible one, Atropos, never finds out, or she will cut his life cord away. Her other sister, Clotho, will rewind the thread and make it seem like he never existed. Does Clotho already know and has been keeping quiet, or has she been neglecting her duties too? Despite the danger, Lachesis plans to see him again tonight and steal a few moments away with her beloved, but her heart is in flux. Her lover said he has something important to ask of her. What could it be? Will he finally reveal his true identity, or will Lachesis discover something she wishes she had never known? Chapter 1. The Love Letter. Lachesis did a terrible thing. She neglected her duty, and she fell in love. Neither would have been a problem if she were a mere mortal. They fell in and out of love every day, and didn't bear as many responsibilities. But she was not one of them. She was one of the fates, weaver of destinies, the dreaded Moirai. And for them, family and duty came before anything else. How could she resist the call of her heart, though? Her eyes were filled with dreams, and his words flowed like honey to her ears, enchanting her with all things beautiful. She might be a fate, but she wasn't dead inside. Not yet, anyway, as long as Atropos didn't find out. Lachesis was taking a risk by seeing him tonight, but her heart was beyond her control. She was playing a dangerous game with destiny. Her destiny. She smiled at the irony of it all. "What are you smiling about?" Clotho asked, her eyebrows furrowed. "Nothing," Lachesis said, quietly. She resumed weaving her thread, but then noticed Clotho's hand had stopped moving. When she looked up, her younger sister was still staring at her. "What is it?" Lachesis asked, her face turning red. Her younger sister craned her neck towards her thread. "Did you see something in the life you were weaving?" Clotho asked. "No. Why?" "No reason. I have never seen you smile like that." "I am delighted to be spending time with you, little sister," Lachesis said. The words came out smoothly. Why wouldn't I smile? At first Clotho was puzzled, but then she seemed content with her half-truth and resumed her work with intense concentration. As Lachesis looked at her young sister's sweet face, with gentle eyes and rosy cheeks, she couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Atropos would have never believed her for a second. Poor, sweet, innocent Clotho. Her little sister knew nothing of the world beyond the palace they lived in, and not once had she been outside Mount Olympus. Her younger sister took her duties seriously and never wavered for a second. Nothing made her curious or sparked her interest. What did she know about love and how crazy it made a person? Lachesis didn't even know herself before yesterday. Lachesis had no idea who her lover was and was about to meet him in the strangest of circumstances. To her, he was merely a phantom of her fantasies, a mysterious figure hiding beneath a cloak of shadows, a lover without a name or a face. That didn't deter her, however, but only made her more determined to find out who he was. A noise coming from the grand foyer caused both fates to look up from their work. In walked their oldest sister, Atropos. The two siblings promptly rose to their feet to welcome her. Atropos wore her usual white robes, flowing from her shoulders and cinched with a golden belt around her waist. She had pulled her hair into a tight bun, without a single strand out of place. A mighty sword was often sheathed on her back, although her most formidable weapon remained hidden. While white was typically associated with tenderness and romance, Lachesis observed it had the opposite effect on her older sister. The white color didn't make her look delicate, it made her look even more severe. Atropos was the most feared of the three sisters, for her task was the most terrible. Out of the three fates, she was the one who cut the thread, ending a mortal life. Atropos could also choose the mechanism by which a person died, not just of mortals, but gods as well. Her sister's scissors, along with her sharp mind and tongue, were her most terrifying weapon. Ever since the onset of the latest mortal war, the sisters had rarely seen Atropos. She had been busy with her duties, working alongside her associate, Death, who was possibly as formidable as her. He ferried the mortal souls to the underworld once the fates' designated time for them had ended. Neither Lachesis nor Clotho had ever seen Death, or knew much about him. Lachesis had no inclination to meet him at all, especially because her older sister was intimidating enough. Sensing the arrival of her older sister, the automatons swiftly entered the room, pulling a cart filled with refreshments. The animated automatons, resembling golden tripods on wheels, had been gifted to them by the master craftsman Daedalus himself. Working autonomously, they carried their own steam and used their own energy. Atropos spotted them and promptly dismissed them with a wave of her hand. "Not now," she said, annoyed. Just as suddenly as they had appeared, the automatons scurried away from sight at her command. "How was your day?" Lachesis and Clotho asked together. They looked at one another and smiled. Atropos didn't notice their sweet exchange, but rather she groaned and threw up her hands in frustration. "He was late again. This is the third time this week." "Who was late?" Clotho asked innocently. "Thanatos. I swear if he does it one more time." Even though Atropos didn't finish her threat, Lachesis shuddered nonetheless. There was something terrifying about seeing Atropos angry, knowing how much power she had in her hands. She almost felt bad for her workmate. Thanatos was the other name of Death. Only in moments of anger would her elder sister speak his true name. Otherwise, she addressed him as the god of death, or simply Death. "Why was he late?" Lachesis asked, concerned. "Did he tell you?" "Most days I could barely get a word out of him. Death only speaks in monosyllables if he's feeling chatty, and today he was in a mood." Atropos rolled her eyes. "Of course, he didn't say much, except that it was important. What could possibly be more important than his job?" Clotho quickly nodded in agreement. It was clear how much she admired her oldest sibling's strong work ethic. She aspired to be like Atropos, much to Lachesis' dismay. Among the three siblings, Lachesis constantly felt like an outsider, plagued by guilt whenever her opinions did not align with the others. Was it wrong to want something else? She thought glumly. "I wonder if Hades knows of his tardiness," Atropos said angrily. "I will have to speak to him in the next meeting." Lachesis tried to steer the conversation away from the god of death, which was contributing to Atropos' worsening mood. "How long will the mortal war last?" she asked her sister. Instantly, the atmosphere turned frigid. Atropos narrowed her eyes as she looked at her. "I'm surprised you are asking this, sister. Shouldn't you know?" Lachesis blushed. "You know I can look at individual lives, but I'm not as good as you are at seeing the big picture, sister," she said quietly. Truth be told, she hadn't been paying much attention lately, finding herself idling more often than not. She loved her work, but occasionally she craved a break from the monotony. Atropos' sharp tone subsided slightly, but not by much. "It's a skill you need to learn, Lachesis. If not for yourself, then for Clotho. I'm not around as much these days, and I'm relying on you to teach our youngest sibling all the signs of destiny." "I'll do better," Lachesis said in a low voice. She felt incredibly small at the moment. To her credit, Clotho noticed her discomfort and promptly averted her eyes, becoming absorbed in whatever lay outside the windows. Atropos sighed in exhaustion, as if she had just been through a brutal war. "I need to rest before I leave," she said resignedly. Both of her other siblings bowed their heads as she went past them. Lachesis let out a breath of relief as soon as Atropos had stepped out of the room. The Fates might live in a heavenly palace, but Atropos' recent bad mood had had a profound effect on the idyllic atmosphere. Whenever her oldest sister was around, even their opulent palace felt small and suffocating. Luckily, Lachesis had something to look forward to. "Clotho, do you think you will be all right being on your own tonight?" Lachesis asked in a casual tone. "Again?" Clotho asked. Lachesis' heart pounded at Clotho's question. She was never one to ask anything. Did she suspect something? Only for a few hours. Would that be okay? Lachesis held her breath, worried, but her little sister nodded. Don't take too long. It was an unspoken rule that at least one of the fates had to be with the threads. Lachesis wouldn't have bothered asking Clotho and snuck out otherwise. Now that her sister had agreed, Lachesis had one less thing to worry about. She hurried into her bedroom and took out the piece of paper that had been haunting her thoughts. The goddess smiled, thinking about how innocently it all started. Lachesis found a letter waiting for her on her table. The goddess kept everything orderly, so the new scroll attracted her attention immediately. Someone must have put it there during the night. But who? No mortal could visit the mountain where the gods and goddesses resided. But that didn't mean they couldn't sneak past a message. If they were part mortal and had contact with the gods, they could have asked Hermes or some other deity for that task. For some reason, Lachesis didn't believe it was another divine being that wrote to her. First, the note was too unassuming. The gods she knew were nothing short of arrogant and boastful. Secondly, it was unsigned. Why would a god hide their name? The more she read the words, the more they sounded like a love letter. But how would she know? Lachesis had never received a love note before, so had no idea what they contained, nor had anything to compare it with. Lachesis had already memorized the letter, but she read it for the millionth time. Dear Spinner of Destinies, how does it feel to hold the thread of life in your hands? I simply cannot imagine shouldering such a tremendous responsibility, but I am certain that the task could not have been entrusted to a more worthy individual. Do you see the hopes and dreams of the soul whose destiny is spun under your delicate touch? Do you feel their joy? Do you experience their sorrows? I have a million questions to ask, and you are the only one that can answer them for me. I want to see you in person and hear the answers through your divine lips. I have so much more I want to say. However, I cannot pen all of my thoughts into words and fit them in this letter. Can I meet you? A humble admirer. P.S. If you say yes, place the note on the windowsill, and I will know. I will tell you where to meet then, and only then. Lachesis didn't want to let go of the note, but she wanted to meet the mystery writer, whose words ignited her soul. She sighed before placing the paper where she was instructed to do so. It rustled slightly, but other than that, it remained where it was. Lachesis must have stared at it for hours before finally looking away to finish her weaving. She had to look at the thread when she allocated the lifespans, or risk making a mistake. Last time, she added 800 years to a man's life instead of 80, and wouldn't hear the end of it from Atropos. Clotho, the poor darling, had to work tirelessly for days correcting her error. Even as she worked, the goddess felt her mind drifting. How did the stranger know? It was like he saw through her soul. How did he know that she relished looking at the thread and seeing where the future headed, the rich moments as well as the trials and tribulations, the choices made and the outcomes they led to, the complexity of life in all its glory? She loved all aspects of her job, except for perhaps one. Lachesis had been inwardly envious of the love stories, but had kept that dark secret to herself. And to think that now she would have one of her own? She felt the flutter of butterflies in her stomach. It was a sensation that was new to her. Her eyes unconsciously drifted towards the windowsill again, and her heart lurched when she noticed the note was missing. She didn't see anyone come into the room. Lachesis endured agony as she waited to get another message. Again, it appeared mysteriously for her on the windowsill by the following morning. The writer dutifully provided the location for their rendezvous, as promised. There were only 2 small words: Crimson Peak. Lachesis blushed. It was a famous spot in the mortal realm, frequently used as a meeting place for lovers. Didn't the location make the intention clear? This was no ordinary meeting. Lachesis would find out soon enough. Before she could leave, she made her way to Atropos' bedchamber and gently knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She risked peeking inside her sister's bedroom, and found it blissfully empty. Atropos must have gone back to work. A smile spread across Lachesis' face as she realized she was in the clear. Lachesis sneaked a glance in the great hall and discovered Clotho quietly toiling away in the corner. She tiptoed through the corner that led outside, carrying her sandals and cloak. her bare feet sliding gently over the polished marble floors. Once outside, Lachesis swiftly put on her sandals and wrapped herself in her cloak, blending into the darkness of the night. Determined, she vowed not to turn back until she reached her destination. The goddess nervously maneuvered through the secluded courtyards with their golden pavements. Her heart pounded so loudly that she feared it would betray her presence. Lachesis rushed past the enchanting waterfalls, where crystal-clear water cascaded down, barely aware of their mesmerizing beauty. She skillfully evaded the prying eyes of both her neighbors and the Horae, the vigilant watchguards stationed by the golden gates. The goddess summoned her wings from the sky, and they descended upon her back as tiny stars, seamlessly forming their divine shape. 2 sets of luminous white wings stood poised, ready to carry her wherever she willed them. Lachesis descended at last to the mortal world, leaving the divine realm behind, driven by her desire to meet her mysterious admirer. She understood the immense risk she was taking, but her impetuous heart was compelling her to disregard all common sense and precautions. She was risking everything to meet him. Chapter 2. Mystery Admirer. Lachesis had only been to the mortal realm a handful of times, and never to this location, although she knew the story of Crimson Peak well. Now blessed by Aphrodite, the goddess of love herself, the original lover's tale was one of tragedy. Long ago, 2 lovers made a pact to meet at this secluded hill. The 2 souls yearned for one another, despite the deep-seated hatred between their families that prevented them from being together. Their love, although veiled in secrecy, danced precariously on the edge of a knife. Their unsanctioned union was soon discovered. As dusk cast its mesmerizing spell on the world, the 2 lovers met and embraced, oblivious to the ominous presence lurking in the shadows. In the echoing silence of the moonlit night, arrows pierced the air and struck their hearts. The cold steel of betrayal found its mark, shattering the young lovers' dreams. Their intertwined bodies fell, leaving their love forever memorialized with a macabre tapestry of red. Their family's hate had prevailed, or so it seemed. Mortals blamed the fates for their destiny, but Lachesis had wept knowing what lied in store for them. Within each woven thread she had laid conditions and contingencies, with every pathway distinct consequences. Thus, while she may have entwined their threads, it was their own choices that determined their ultimate fate. The secluded hill, now renamed Crimson Peak, still held close by the whispers of their forbidden love. Aphrodite vowed to safeguard the memory of their meeting, along with the lingering magic of their love, forever. Despite the tragic fate of the original 2, their doomed love gave hope to many others. The hill transformed itself into an enchanted haven for lovers. Under the watchful protection of the goddess of love, the hill became a sentinel, and even a sentient protector. The hill would give warning to lovers of any imminent danger. A magical mist would veil their meeting, shielding them from prying eyes. Not only was the location safe, but it was also beautiful. The crimson flowers that adorn the hillside always remain in bloom, filling the air with their sweet fragrance. Lachesis was savoring the fragrant breath of the flowers when his voice reached her ears. "You are more beautiful than I could have imagined." His voice was the sort of voice that emanated a quiet depth, reaching into the depths of your soul. "I am glad that I finally got to meet you, goddess." His captivating voice startled Lachesis from her reverie, but then she composed herself and addressed the stranger. "Who are you?" "A humble admirer," he replied, echoing the sign-off of his letter. His face remained concealed within the mist that was blanketing the hill. "Can you show yourself?" the goddess asked. As he emerged from the shadows and approached closer, her heart thumped loudly within her chest. But she could finally see what he looked like. He possessed a lean, muscular figure with a regal countenance and gentle, honey-brown eyes. He was of average height, perhaps a few inches taller than herself. His hair mirrored the darkness of midnight, which was a striking contrast to her own. Lachesis had radiant golden hair, with bright blue eyes and a sun-kissed complexion that stood in stark opposition to his ethereal, moon-like pale skin. In every way, he embodied her complete opposite. As her gaze wandered, she found herself fixated on the thick black leather glove on his left hand. He noticed her staring at it. "Do not concern yourself with my hand. It is a condition I have." His enchanting voice cast a spell on her heart again. "I can help you with that," the goddess found herself saying, much to her own surprise. "Why did I say that?" she reprimanded herself. "I don't even know him." "Thank you, but I will have to decline," he said, smiling. Instead of feeling relieved that he didn't exploit her momentary lapse of judgment, Lachesis found herself offended. "Why? Don't you believe in my capabilities?" she questioned. "It's not that, goddess," he calmly responded, without a trace of offense. "Then what is the reason?" "I have simply accepted my lot in life." There was a hint of sadness in his voice. What a painfully mortal thing to say. "You say that you have accepted your lot in life, yet you called upon a fate to meet you?" "I did." Again, his deep eyes revealed nothing of his thoughts. "But why?" "I want to know you better," he said, unabashed. He sounded so sincere that Lachesis felt her heart flutter in her chest. She knew she was rapidly falling under his spell, but couldn't resist. "What is your name?" "Nat." Such an ordinary mortal name, Lachesis couldn't help but think. "Just Nat?" she asked. "Where are you from?" He shakes his head. "Forgive me for not revealing my complete identity. I have much more to lose, goddess." Lachesis felt offended. "I, too, am taking a risk by being here," she huffed. Nat gave a crooked smile, as if what she said amused him. "You are free to leave. I won't stop you, though I would much prefer it if you stayed." How can a mere small smile instantly transform someone's face? The goddess was in danger. She knew she was barely holding on to her heart. From his hypnotic voice to his mysterious aura to his mischievous smile, he had her completely wrapped around his finger. Nat was trying to read her silence and failing. "Are you afraid that your father will find out?" he asked. Her father? He was talking about Zeus. Little did he know. "I am not afraid of him," she said with a smile. "Then what is it?" "My sister," she said. "Even my father is afraid of Atropos." "You are afraid of your sister?" Nat seemed astounded. "But you are a fate, just like her." "And clearly, you don't know my sister." A muscle twitched at the corner of his mouth. "She sounds like a handful." "Tell me about it," Lachesis said under her breath. Nat smiled and left it at that. He is the only one asking questions, Lachesis thought. I should probably say something. "What about your parents?" she asked. "Most people, if not all, are intimidated by my mother." "Intimidated? Why?" "Let us just say she has a very dark nature," he said without smiling. The goddess couldn't make sense of what he just said. Could his family be the reason Nat was so secretive? "Do you have any siblings?" she asked, curious. He paused before answering. "I am closest to my half-brother." Again, he was being secretive. Nat didn't say how many siblings he had, just that he was closest to one. No matter, she would figure him out eventually. "Tell me about him," she said. A warm smile lit up his beautiful face. "I call him Sleepy. Most people treat us like we are twin brothers." Lachesis felt a tinge of envy. "I wish I had a twin. My younger sister is too young, and my older sister makes it seem like we are worlds apart." "Well, at this moment, that is true. You are in the mortal realm, while she is at Mount Olympus. So, you actually are worlds apart." Lachesis' face breaks into a smile. "That is not what I meant." She gazes at the sky above, captivated by a falling star. The sky at her home never appears quite the same as in the mortal world. The goddess sighs. "My sister will kill me if she finds out I am here." Nat muttered something under his breath which sounded like, "Me too." "Why do you call your brother Sleepy?" the goddess asked, curious. "Because anyone who has a conversation with him can't help but feel like falling asleep." "Is that so?" Lachesis raised her eyebrows. "He talks too much." "No, he is just boring," Nat said seriously. Lachesis suppressed a giggle. "And he is your favorite?" Nat shrugs his shoulders.
I didn't say he was my favorite, just that he was closest to me.
He couldn't hide the teasing smile on his face. Whatever you say, I still think that you are fond of him, the goddess said.
Nat gave a polite bow. You caught me, he said with a wink. But I will only admit to him being my second most favorite person, as I stand in the company of the first.
Lachesis felt her heart skip a beat. You have a way with words, don't you? She said, blushing.
You are too generous. You wouldn't be saying that if you heard my poetry, which according to my second favorite person is atrocious.
I would like to hear one of your poems before I make that judgment.
You truly are the daughter of justice, Nat said.
Themis is my mother, but Zeus is my father. Don't forget that, Lachesis warned, teasingly.
Nat suppressed a grin. So, if I offend you, will you smite me?
Perhaps.
This makes the stakes high, Nat said. I never thought reciting poetry would be so thrilling, but I am not one to back down from a challenge.
There is a nervousness and excitement palpable in his voice.
Do you still want to hear it?
Lachesis gave a slight nod to show that he has her permission. Without any hesitation he recited, as though he had been anticipating this moment his whole life.
O charmed weaver of blessed fate, what secrets do you see? None can be as beautiful as your divine sight, which brought me to my knees. O lovely spinner of enchanted fate, what secrets do you hear? None can enthrall me like your tempting voice. Nothing could hold as dear. O captivating knitter of magical fate, what secrets would you share? None can be greater than the one in my heart, of which you remain unaware.
After he had finished, Lachesis remained quiet for a few moments. It was a struggle to find the right words to express her thoughts.
Well, what do you think? Nat asked. Can I tell my brother that he was wrong?
It is both compelling and horrifying, Lachesis said. I don't know which of them it is more of. Nat gave a hearty laugh, causing her cheeks to blush.
I believe I should start listening to my brother. Perhaps he has a valid point.
Don't get me wrong, all the right words were there, except...
They made a terrible connection?
Yeah, something like that. Lachesis nibbled on the corner of her lips. The last verse. What was the secret you were talking about? The one I wasn't aware of?
Only death can let you know of that one, Nat said, his tone more solemn than before.
A noise that came from behind startled both of them. What was that? Lachesis asked, afraid. Could it be the hill warning them about a danger nearby?
Nat peers into the darkness. That, I believe, was a cat.
A cat? A muscle twitches in the corner of his mouth.
Has the divine goddess not seen a mortal cat before?
I have seen a cat, but have not experienced interacting with one, Lachesis said, blushing. Though I know and have played with chimeras and griffins, they are giant feline beasts found on Mount Olympus.
If you know one feline, then you know them all, Nat said with a wry smile. The ones of the mortal realm may be smaller, but you wouldn't believe it when you actually deal with one.
Lachesis smiled. There was another noise in the distance, however. This time, they couldn't tell where it was coming from. Was that another cat? She asked.
Nat shrugs. This time, I am not so sure.
I must go, Lachesis said, reluctantly. My sister, Clotho, will be waiting for me. Nat nods his head solemnly. Although they hadn't touched, there was something intimate about his gaze, as if he couldn't bear to look away from her.
We will meet again, he promised.
When? Lachesis asked breathlessly. How?
I will send you a note, just like the first time.
How did you get that note to Mount Olympus in the first place?
Again, that is something I cannot tell you, because it will reveal too much, Nat said.
You can keep your secrets, but I will find out who you are, Lachesis promised herself. Nat continued to gaze at her intently. As he moved closer, her heart began pounding once more. Tenderly, he held her hands in his and kissed the back of one.
Trust me when I say, I will count the seconds until we see each other again.
I will be counting them too,
Nat gave her one last gaze before vanishing into the mist. The sound of feathers flapping, perhaps that of a lost bird, echoed faintly in the distance, but apart from that, an eerie silence descended upon the hill in his absence. I must go. I need to get home before Clotho notices my absence, Lachesis thought. She already knew what she was going to do next. Once I am back at the palace, I will go through the archives to find out who he is. Lachesis had always been cautious to abide by the rules. She might search for a loophole, but never consciously violated them. The Fates were prohibited from tampering with the threads that had been stored in the archives, as those destinies had already been predetermined. However, after meeting Nat, the goddess sensed a shift within herself. She felt more daring. Despite a deep-seated nervousness about being discovered, Lachesis would go against all rules to uncover the identity of her mysterious lover. She simply had to know who he was. Chapter 3. Clotho Suspects Something? Clotho had dozed off at her table, giving Lachesis an easy opportunity to sneak in. She was already engrossed in her work when her youngest sister stirred. Clotho rubbed her eyes, still heavy with sleep, when she woke up. "You are back?" she asked, surprised. Lachesis felt her heartbeat quicken. "What do you mean, I am back? I was always here." "No, that is not true," Clotho said, furrowing her brows. "I went to your room, but you weren't inside." "Why were you in my room?" Lachesis asked, her face blushing. She never had been a good liar. "I was having trouble with a link in my thread, and was wondering if you could help me," Clotho said. "I can look at it now," Lachesis said. Clotho quietly accepted her offer without much fuss. The two sisters got busy trying to solve the problem, so Lachesis thought for a second she was in the clear. That is until Clotho asked her again. "Where had you gone to, sis? I searched the entire palace." Without thinking, Lachesis quickly blurted, "I was in the gardens." "I looked there too, but didn't see you," Clotho said. Her words had trapped Lachesis. Lying was futile at this point, so she went with a half-truth and hoped she wouldn't get caught again. "You didn't let me finish. I was in the gardens, but later on I went to the pool near the waterfalls for a swim. Did you happen to go there?" Clotho hesitated. "No, I didn't go that far." Lachesis smiled. She had a feeling that Clotho wouldn't stray too far away from the palace. The goddess wanted to feel relieved, but noticed her younger sister was still frowning. Did she not believe her? "What's the matter, Clotho?" she asked gently. "We always used to go to the waterfalls together," Clotho said in a small voice. Lachesis immediately realized her mistake and felt a wave of guilt wash over her. "I should have asked you to come with me," Lachesis said with a sigh. "Lately I have been so flustered that I didn't even think about inviting you. I apologize, Clotho." "That's okay," her younger sister said. "I wasn't done with my work, so I couldn't have joined you anyway." "Clotho, you have been such a gem. As a token of my appreciation, why don't you take the entire day off?" Lachesis suggested. "If you'd like, you can go for a swim now." "But my work." "I will look over it for you," Lachesis said with a smile. "Come, baby sister, go have some fun. You deserve a break." "What about you, Lachesis? Will you come with me?" Clotho asked, her eyes shining bright. "I have already taken my break, and I will feel guilty if I take any more time off. I need to get back to my tasks," Lachesis reasoned. "But you should definitely go. The waters will feel wonderful and refreshing after a long, hard day." Lachesis couldn't help but feel smug. She was accomplishing two goals simultaneously. First, she was doing something nice for her sister, and second, she was clearing the rooms so she could wait for the note without being observed. If Clotho saw her anxiously pacing the room, she would surely suspect something. However, it would all depend on whether her sister agrees to her offer. The goddess knew she had nothing to worry as soon as Clotho's face lit up with delight. The youngest Fate quickly embraced Lachesis before leaving the room. Lachesis watched her little sister with fondness.
It was true they weren't spending as much time together. None of them were. It seemed unlikely they would have time together soon, as Atropos was focused on the mortal war, and Lachesis was dealing with her irrational heart. However, it wasn't solely work or distracted hearts that were keeping the sisters apart, but also the need to keep secrets from one another. Lachesis was breaking long-standing rules and intended to break another one soon. For now, she would be patient and look into the archives later, at a better time. The goddess still had to solve the mystery of who her admirer was. Nat felt bad about lying to the goddess. I could just tell her the truth in the note, he thought, but that would be a cowardly thing to do. And what if she stopped seeing him? He didn't think he could bear the thought. His brother, to his surprise, was still waiting for him at his home. They were often mistaken for twins, but Nat had no clue why. Sleepy was a younger, restless, more sleep-deprived version of him. They had similar figures, but Sleepy was definitely the louder one of the two. His unruly dark hair, coupled with his unnerving eyes, which reminded Nat of two infinitely deep pools with no end in sight. It was getting dark, and his brother should have left for work by now, but Nat understood the reason for him lingering around. Sleepy had a hidden agenda for staying behind, and it wasn't selfless. He wanted to snoop on him. His first words confirmed it. "So, did she recognize you?" "Nope," Nat replied with a grin. "You lost that bet, bro. You owe me a foot rub." Sleepy made a face. "It won't take her long, unless she's really dense," his brother replied, slightly irritated. He didn't take losing well, and neither did Nat, for that matter, but at least he was careful not to reveal it on his face. "There is a sweet innocence about her," Nat said. "I must admit, it took me by surprise." "So, what does the goddess look like?" Sleepy arched his eyebrows suggestively. Nat scoffs. "Why will I tell you that?" "She is that hot, then?" Sleepy blew a low whistle. "Come on, Nat. Be a good brother and share the details." "Not in your lifetime," Nat said. "Go find something else to entertain yourself with." "What? Are you afraid I might steal her?" Nat laughs hard. "Why are you still here? Shouldn't you be elsewhere, boring someone to sleep?" His brother scowls. "At least I don't bore them to death, like you do." "You think you are so clever," Nat said. "That is because I am," Sleepy said smugly. He narrows his eyes and stares at his brother. "What now?" Nat asked, annoyed. "I know that look, and it usually spells trouble." "Does she know about the other woman in your life?" Nat made an exasperated sound. "You are ridiculous. You know that?" A grin spread across his brother's face, and he made a tisking sound. "She won't like being shared." "Now you are just being annoying," he replied. Nat glances around the house and asks, "Where's the cat?" Sleepy shrugs his shoulders. "She wasn't here when I came over." "The only reason I tolerated you being here was so you could babysit the cat," Nat said. "At least help me find her." The two brothers searched the entire house, but the cat was nowhere to be seen. "Maybe she got tired of your two-timing ways and left?" Sleepy suggested. "I hate you," Nat said. "Leave this instant." His brother put a hand over his heart. "Ouch, you don't mean that." "I absolutely meant what I said," Nat said seriously. His brother made a sad face. "You don't mean that. Aren't I your brother?" "Half brother," Nat corrected. "So you only love me half as much. Is that what you were saying?" His brother pouted. "Even the cat gets more of your love." Nat grabbed the cushion from the nearest couch and tossed it at him. "Stop being so dramatic, Sleepy, and go to work." "Or what?" his brother asked, childishly. Nat didn't want to say it, but there was only one quick way to get rid of his brother. "Or I tell Mom," he said. He heard a sharp intake of breath from Sleepy. "You wouldn't dare." "I definitely would," Nat replied. I am sure Mom would love to hear about all your shenanigans. Sheesh, you don't have to tell me twice. I am going. It was so satisfying knowing which buttons to push. As a bonus, his threat wiped the smug smile off his brother's face. Despite his victory, Nat felt a tinge of guilt. Bye, he said, not looking at his younger brother. And, Sleepy? Yeah? I love you, bro. First, you threaten me with Mom, and now you say this? I don't need your scraps, Sleepy said, wounded. Nat saw through his act. But you will take it anyway? Sleepy gave a lopsided grin. You know me. Always. Love you too, Nat. I have a loony for a brother, Nat thought, shaking his head. He can behave like a dream, or act like a nightmare if he chooses. Thankfully, Sleepy had finally left, granting Nat a rare moment of peace. But he couldn't rest yet. He still needed to find the cat. It took him an additional hour to find her. She was busy napping under the bed. There you are, Nat said, pleased. The cat gave a muffled meow, still half asleep. It was a black cat with green eyes. The sleek, ebony fur of the cat seemed to absorb the surrounding light, making her appear even darker. Her eyes were luminous green, that stood out vividly against the dark backdrop of her fur. Her paws, as dark as her fur, moved silently on the ground, giving the impression of a silent predator roaming through the night. She often reminded him of himself. He picked up the cat gently. Even though he was wearing the glove on his left hand, he was careful not to let his bare skin touch her. Did you miss me? From the moment Nat laid eyes on this creature, it was impossible not to fall for her charms. Her intense green eyes held a world of untold secrets, ancient wisdom, and a hint of mischief. The cat was fully awake now, and openly staring at him with her emerald eyes. I know you don't like Sleepy, but he is the only family I can trust with you, Nat said apologetically. Because of who he was and who he was working for, Nat already had a target on his back. The thought of his other siblings stumbling upon the cat sent shivers down his spine. They would probably see the small, helpless creature as his vulnerability. What was even more frightening was the thought they would intentionally harm her as a way to directly target him. Despite Sleepy's eccentric ways, he was safe. He didn't pose the danger the rest of his brothers and sisters did. How messed up is that? He thought. Nat heaved a sigh and carefully placed the cat on his lap. Then he folded his gloved left hand and kept it tucked behind his back. Though it was an awkward way to sit, he preferred to be safe rather than risk accidentally touching the cat. With his free hand, he scratched behind the cat's ears. You should probably know that I finally met the goddess. The cat twitches its tail to show that she was listening and wanted him to continue. You should have seen her. It was like she was made to haunt my dreams. Her beautiful face meant to torture my heart into agony. Nat had almost forgotten the reason he met Lachesis. If the cat could roll its eyes, she certainly would have done so after hearing his lament. However, she settled for a look filled with intense judgment, as only a cat can give. Nat falters. What? You don't think I should have met her? The cat growls. Nat hides his smile. Don't tell me you are jealous. The cat looked away, flicking her tail. Nat keeps talking to himself. She is nothing like her sister. It would have been easier if she was. The cat gave a prominent yawn. You don't care, do you? Nat said, shaking his head. I think I am in trouble. Why must everything be so hard for me? The cat looked at him as though the situation he was in was entirely his own fault, which indeed it was. But now that he had started, he couldn't stop. I have to see her again, Nat said. I must gain her trust. Then I can tell her everything. Surely, with time, the goddess will find it in her heart to forgive me. Anxious, he turned his attention towards the cat. Won't she? The cat gave a muffled meow, but this time, Nat wasn't sure whether the temperamental creature agreed with him or not. Chapter 4. Secrets and more secrets. Atropos finally meets with Hades to discuss a pressing matter. Despite the passing weeks and her constant reminders, death still doesn't arrive on time, and the goddess grows tired of being ignored. Coming here has been her last resort. The king of the underworld sits imperiously on his throne, with his beautiful wife, Persephone, beside him. Lush tendrils of ivy and flowers blooming with an eternal glow decorate her throne. They only served to accentuate the beauty of the goddess in the softly lit chamber. Atropos felt a tinge of nervousness in their presence, but reassures herself that she is in the right. She would be the one accountable if Death was unable to fulfill his responsibilities. "Why did you wish to see us?" Hades asked. It was never I for him, rather a collective we. He and Persephone. He and his wife were a unit. His deference was endearing, but proved challenging on occasions like this one, when Atropos wanted a private audience with Hades. "Death has been neglecting his duty," Atropos stated firmly, her voice unwavering. "As the mortal war reaches its peak and souls remain unguided to the underworld, this is quickly becoming a major problem. I have already broached this topic with you on a prior occasion." "You have, I remember," Hades said. "But it has been weeks since you first mentioned it. Has the situation not changed?" "No, it has not," Atropos replied firmly. Hades brought his fingertips together contemplatively. What do you have to say for yourself, Thanatos?" The throne room fills with a black fog, and the god of death materializes before their eyes. He had been silently present throughout the entire conversation, concealed from sight. Upon seeing him, Atropos experienced a surge of annoyance. She would have preferred to express her thoughts directly to him, and disapproved of the sneaky behavior. Death bows on one knee before the king and queen of the underworld. His face remained hidden under his cloak, and he knelt on the scythe in his hand for support. His raven wings remained folded on his back. Atropos was prepared to defend herself from any and all accusations, but to her surprise, Death readily acknowledged his mistakes. "My king, I admit to my wrongs," he said in his deep voice. "I have been preoccupied with a personal matter, and have not been giving my work the attention it deserves." "Consider this a warning," Hades' voice booms. "I do not want to hear you neglecting your duties again." Death gives a faint nod and vanishes immediately, surprising everyone in the throne room. Atropos sighs with relief. The entire ordeal had been unpleasant for her, but perhaps now Death will work as he should, and everything will go back to normal. After sharing an indecipherable look with Persephone, the king of the underworld shifted his focus towards her. "Are you satisfied, goddess?" Hades asked. "I am," Atropos replied. "Death is my hardest worker, despite his recent indiscretions," Hades said in a grim voice. "I was surprised to hear about his failure. It must be a momentary lapse, but I would appreciate it if you could keep a watchful eye on him and inform me if anything suspicious catches your attention." "I will," Atropos said. "Thank you." "Go now, daughter of Thetis," Hades said. "I trust you will continue to work fairly and with justice." Persephone waited until the goddess had left before expressing her opinion. "That is unlike Thanatos," she said to her husband in her melodious voice. "Yes, my love, I concur with your thoughts." She appeared visibly concerned. "The god of death appears conflicted." Death looked at her, taken aback. Conflicted how? Although Thanatos readily admitted to his faults, he also appeared like he was barely listening. His body might have been in this room. His focus was elsewhere. "Did you observe how quickly he left?" "I noticed that," Hades replied. "I thought perhaps it was because of the guilt he felt." "Death's ruthlessness and unwavering focus have made him ideal for his role," observed the Queen of the Underworld. "Something is amiss, but it is difficult to discern what it may be without knowing the complete truth." "Atropos will be closely monitoring him, and I doubt anything can evade her watchful eye," Hades remarked. Persephone nodded, though she still had her doubts. What is distracting the god of death from his responsibilities? She wondered. Triumphant, Atropos returned to Mount Olympus, but a lingering thought gnawed at the back of her mind. What could explain Death's unusual behavior? Even Hades appeared surprised. The goddess vowed to heed the words of the underworld king and remain vigilant towards the god of death. There was an unmistakable feeling that Thanatos was up to something, and Atropos simply couldn't ignore her intuition. She would find out the truth and fix everything. Lachesis finally found her chance to sneak into the archives. She had to make sure no one knew where she was or what she was doing. It would spell big trouble for her if she was found out. No one would trust the fates with their destinies anymore, and that would spell the end of their very existence. The goddess felt the hum of magic as soon as she entered the sacred space. Thousands upon thousands of rows of marble shelves lined the massive room. Each shelf exhibited boxes made entirely of pure gold. However, their true value lay beyond the material itself, as within every box in the archives contained the threads of life. The sisters had already gone through these threads and placed them here. They weren't supposed to touch them once they were finished. But Lachesis had to know who Nat was. Lachesis was careful to keep the threads organized, and as she found them, for any displaced thread will have a ripple effect and impact countless others. It was painstaking work, and it took her ages just to get through one box. Why can't I find anything about him? The goddess had a rough idea of where Nat might live. She could also guess his age, and knew what he looked like, but still she had no clue who he was. All the information she had about him should have been enough. Why couldn't she find it? It was like no mortal like him ever existed. In the midst of her search, Lachesis heard her little sister calling out for her, and she sighed. I will have to come back here again another time, she thought. The goddess couldn't let Clotho see she had been in the archives, fearing that she might inform Atropos. Not necessarily to cause trouble, but simply out of curiosity. Her investigation would have to wait. The goddess was meeting Nat again that night. Perhaps I could gather more clues about him, and would no longer need to sneak into the archives anymore, she thought hopefully. Yet, when Lachesis reunited with him, his beautiful face once again consumed her thoughts, causing her to forget everything else. They met again the following night, and whenever she could sneak out of the palace. The more they met, the more Lachesis felt the need to solve the mystery of his identity slipping away from her. Did it really matter who he was? Her mind said one thing, but her heart another, and in that battle, Lachesis was left conflicted. They only met at Crimson Peak, and nowhere else. Lachesis found it safe and the least likely place to run into her older sister. Nat seemed to feel the same, except for the one occasion when he mentioned a wish for the goddess to meet his cat. They talked about everything except him. The topics ranged from silly to mundane. He asked for her opinions on everything, from her favorite color to things she had never even thought about. It was only after several meetings that the goddess realized she hadn't even asked him the most basic question. Nat, what do you do for work? She asked. For a split second, it seemed like he wouldn't answer, but then he said, Transport. Transport? As in cargo? People, he corrected. I move people across the border. Lachesis had heard of the mass exodus because of the ongoing war. Thousands upon thousands of mortals were fleeing their homes in order to protect their families. It was the only thing they could do to save themselves from torture and certain death from the invading armies. If Nat was helping them, then his job was fraught with peril. His life would be constantly in danger. Her heart constricted at the thought. Why did I fall in love with a mortal? Lachesis thought, not for the first time. I have to constantly worry about his mortality. What are you thinking about, goddess? Nat asked. Should I tell him? Do you worry about dying? She asked. I can honestly say that I don't. His answer caught her by surprise. Why not? There are greater things to fear, goddess. Such as what? What can be a greater fear for a mortal than death? Someone hurting those I care about. Lachesis contemplates her sisters and agrees wholeheartedly. She cannot imagine any misfortune falling on her younger sister without it shattering her heart. And despite occasional conflicts with Atropos, she would risk everything to protect her older sister from danger. What else frightens you? She asked. Not being able to say what is in my heart, but I know it will be worse if I act on those feelings. Lachesis blushes and plays with the hem of her dress. Why would you be afraid of that? Nat runs a hand through his hair. Because of my condition. I'm incapable of getting close to anyone. Even with this glove, I constantly worry about what could happen. And yet, it doesn't guarantee complete safety. A simple tear or break in the material will bring disaster to those I touch. I am not just anyone. The goddess thought. I just need to convince Nat of that. I can heal the greatest of ailments, Lachesis said gently. You need not be afraid to get close to me. Much as I would love to believe that, I wish it was true, goddess. His refusal puzzled Lachesis. It must be an incredibly powerful curse if Nat was unwilling to believe what she was saying. Who is the one responsible for what afflicts you? The goddess asked. He pauses for a second. Death. My sister Atropos works with the god of death. Perhaps I can talk to him? No, goddess. Promise me you will do no such thing. Lachesis remains quiet. When did death do this? Why did he do this to you? Nat's expression morphs into one of turmoil. I was born cursed, with death having little say in the matter. If it's all right with you, goddess, I'd prefer not to discuss this topic any further. Lachesis was even more confused since they had broached the topic. However, she let it go for the time being, solely for Nat's sake. She didn't like to see him in pain, not even for a second. So, do you have any new poems for me? The goddess asked, fluttering her eyelashes. Nat burst into a hearty laugh, which warmed her soul. I thought you never wanted to hear one again, he said, smiling. Lachesis smiled. I think it's an acquired taste. Now that I have survived the first, I can bear to hear the second. Would you share one with me? Anything for you, goddess, Nat replied. Her heart soared at the sight of his warm smile. Chapter 5. Love Blossoms. Ever since Nat revealed about his curse, 2 questions relentlessly pounded in Lachesis's head like the beatings of a drum. What was the curse? Why did death curse him? Lachesis had already given up, but was now forced to resume her search because of this new mystery. 2 weeks passed before she found an opportunity to sneak into the archives. This time she was less cautious, as she was in a hurry. As the goddess rushed through the threads, a disturbing thought suddenly invaded her mind, making her sick to her stomach. What if Nat were to die tomorrow? Would she be able to watch him die, or would she attempt to alter his fate? Her heart shrunk. What if he was already in the clutches of death? The glove on Nat's left hand came to her mind. He was clearly hiding something. What if it wasn't a curse, but a terrible disease, and he already knew of his impending mortality? But why would he lie to her? Pain pulsed through Lachesis's head, heightening her distress. This was precisely why the Fates were forbidden from falling in love and prohibited from venturing into the mortal realm. They started feeling the same emotions as mortals, and the same weaknesses. What would happen if her sisters found out about Nat? Would they be accepting? It was more likely they wouldn't be. What was the worst thing that could happen? If Atropos found out, she would cut his life cord, and Nat would die. Or worse, her other sister Clotho would rewind the thread and make it seem like he never existed. No, I can never let them find out. Despite her utmost efforts, Lachesis once again failed to discover any new information about Nat. If only it had been as easy as looking into her own future, but the Fates could not see their own destinies. Their only purpose was to lead an ordinary, uneventful life and not deviate from the one they had. Lachesis had broken too many rules to realize it was no longer possible. The goddess would have to think of another way to save her mortal lover. Looking at the thread in front of her, the weaver had a brilliant idea that might just work. The next time the 2 lovers met, they both had brought presents for each other. Nat held a beautiful bouquet in his arms for her. Why did you bring me poppies? Lachesis asked, looking at the colorful cup-shaped petals. They symbolize remembrance and signify hope for a peaceful future, he replied. They also represent death, she thought grimly, but didn't share those thoughts with Nat. The goddess had something entirely surprising prepared for her gift. She took it out and tied it onto his wrist. The thread of life shimmered on his wrist, radiating the brilliance of stars. I wanted you to have this, Lachesis said shyly. If my sister ever comes for you and cuts your thread, you will have another to buy you some time. You will have another to buy you some time. He stared at her gift. What did this cost you? He asked, amazed. The goddess hesitated. It was a price I was willing to give. Nat runs a hand through his hair. Will this get you in trouble? Lachesis stays silent. Nat furrowed his eyebrows. I cannot accept this, knowing it would put you in danger. Will you tell me the truth? What will it cost you? I cannot say for certain. Please, take it back. I appreciate the gesture, but the thought is enough for me, he said as he placed the thread in her hand. Nat left her astonished as he walked away, widening the gap between them. Was he leaving her? Lachesis spoke quickly, suddenly afraid he would leave her and never return. I stole time from millions of mortal lives, a second from each thread to form this one. They will not notice it. Nat stood still. What if it was a second out of their happiness? His back was still facing away, but his face angled towards her slightly. Lachesis shook her head. I only took from their darkest moments. Nat's body was now directly facing her. So this thread that you wove for me is stolen, and formed from moments of mortal anguish? Yes. Lachesis' lower lip trembled. Does the idea revile you? Do you hate it? And in turn, do you despise me? She asked, afraid. Nat stepped forward, quickly closing the space between them, and pulled her into his embrace. This is the greatest gift anyone could have given me. The goddess gasped when he pressed his lips against hers, expressing his gratitude with a fervent kiss. She laced her hands into his soft hair, her sigh shifting into a soft moan. The feeling of his lips on hers was pure ecstasy, and left her craving for more. However, just as suddenly as he had kissed her, he abruptly pulled away. Lachesis was still reeling from his kiss and was dazed. What happened? Why did you stop? She asked. I remembered who I truly am, Nat confessed, his voice full of regret. I do not deserve to be with anyone, especially not someone like you, goddess. You can't hurt me, Lachesis assured him. I can, Nat replied, his gaze fixed on the glove he wore on his left hand. Trust me, no matter how powerful the curse, you can't hurt me, Lachesis repeated. I am the goddess of life and fate. I am sorry. I am not giving up, the goddess said. One day you will believe my words, and then you will have nothing to fear anymore. She gently took his right hand in hers and interlaced their fingers. Nat didn't say a word, but to her relief, he didn't pull his hand away either. I will break his curse, Lachesis thought, determined, even if it means striking a bargain with death himself. After what seemed like an eternity rather than mere weeks, Nat caught a fleeting sight of his brother. Because of their demanding work schedules, both brothers had been too busy to meet. Sleepy was equally, if not more, anxious to see him. Brother, we have finally reconnected. It has been ages, Sleepy exclaimed upon seeing him. I had a feeling I would find you here, at the very least. I am happy to see you, but I am afraid I don't have much time, Nat apologized. I came to feed the cat, and I was just about to leave. Sleepy made a tisking sound. This war has transformed brothers into mere acquaintances, he said, shaking his head. Nat took a closer look at his younger brother and noticed that he did not appear well. How are you holding up? It's kind of you to ask. I am doing terribly, and I must appear just as terrible to deserve your concern, Sleepy said with a smile. People have all but forgotten about me. The war is constantly on their minds, at all hours of day and night. I will never get enough work at this rate, and will be left idle, wasting away to nothing. Nat let out a sigh. I'm sorry. What are you sorry for? Sleepy asked. This war has had the opposite effect on your work. You never have a moment's peace, do you? No, Nat admitted. It's been incredibly busy for me. How are the journeys going? Sleepy asked. They are becoming unbearable. Pain laced through Nat's voice. I cannot block out their tears or their screams. Each time I feel I am losing a part of myself. I am sorry, brother, Sleepy said. I am sorry for the lot given in your life. I wish I could take your place. No, don't wish for that, Nat said. Never wish for that. He gives a small smile. One of us has to soothe when the other takes away. This is the way it has been, and this is the way it will remain.
But there is one thing that you can do for me." "What is it?" Sleepy asked. "I will do anything for you, brother." "Can you play me one of your melodies?" As soon as he uttered the words, Sleepy retrieved his flute. With deft fingers, he wielded its enchanting power, producing the most heartwarming melodies. Nat could feel his spirits rise after weeks of despair. The only time he experienced relief was when he met the goddess, but regrettably, he could not meet her as often as he wished. "Thank you," Nat said in a low voice. Sleepy put the instrument away. "At least someone still appreciates my talents," he said with a hint of bitterness. At that moment, the cat entered the room, but as soon as she caught sight of his younger brother, she took a step back and hastily scampered out of the room. "That was rude," Sleepy muttered, watching the animal retreat. Nat raised an eyebrow. "She would like you if only you didn't make her feel groggy." "Well, I would like her too if she didn't make me grouchy," his younger brother retorted. Nat tried to hide his smile. It was just like Sleepy to get offended by a cat who simply ignored him. Sleepy noticed something shimmering on the cat's neck and exclaimed, "What was that?" Nat had almost forgotten about it. "That is a thread of fate, a gift from the goddess." "That is some gift. I have never heard of the fates giving one out before. The sisters guard the threads as fiercely as the dracones hoard their gold," Sleepy exclaims. "Her generosity surprised me as well," Nat replied. Sleepy sighs. "I wished I had a girlfriend like that." "She is not my girlfriend," Nat said automatically. "She is my life." His younger brother thinks of something and then frowns. "What are you thinking of?" Nat asked. Your expression changed suddenly. "I was wondering if you told her the truth yet." Nat looks side to side and doesn't meet his eyes. "I have told her some things," he said evasively. "Some things? How about everything?" Nat pales. "Not yet. You cannot be selective about the truth," Sleepy said, shaking his head. "When will you tell her?" "I haven't had the right opportunity." Sleepy narrows his eyes. "How long have you been seeing her?" 2 months. Sleepy groans. "That is more than enough time, brother. You must tell her. If you don't, and she hears it from someone else, what do you think will happen?" "It will be a disaster." Nat ran a hand through his hair. "I will lose her trust completely." "Then do it. Do it now," Sleepy said with an urgency in his voice. "Brother, I have never seen you this content. Do not lose her. She might just be the best thing that has ever happened to you." "She is." "That is what makes me afraid," Nat admits. "Do I even deserve such happiness?" Sleepy looked straight into his eyes and said, "Listen to me. You deserve every happiness in the entire universe." Nat shook his head, not believing his words. Sleepy grunted in response to his stubbornness. "Can you answer a question for me?" He pressed his older brother. "It depends on what you ask," Nat replied. "I am your younger brother. When have I ever steered you wrong?" Sleepy asked. A smile broke across Nat's face as he replied, "Never." "Then listen to me and tell her the truth," Sleepy urged. "You won't regret it." His younger brother finally broke through his defenses, and he saw the wisdom of his words. "When I see her next, I will tell her everything," Nat promised. Chapter 6. Who is he? Lachesis was growing increasingly anxious, as it had been days since she last saw Nat. She was also behind on her work because she couldn't concentrate at all. To make matters worse, she saw Atropos enter the archives and return with a visible frown. The last time Lachesis had gone in there, she hadn't been as careful, and now she regretted not double-checking. Did her sister notice something was wrong? Could she tell someone had tampered with the archives? Atropos had just completed her annual inspection, so perhaps she noticed the discrepancy in the thread's timeline. However, if Atropos did discover anything, she remained silent, leaving Lachesis feeling even more tense. Lachesis saw her sister standing by the archive door. The goddess couldn't take the suspense any longer, so she blurted out, "How did the inspection go, Atropos?" "It was fine, sister," Atropos replied, slightly annoyed. Her sister didn't indicate anything was awry, or if she suspected something, but her tone suggested otherwise. Perhaps she hadn't done the final tally yet, or was still going over the calculations? This was not good. Lachesis needed to do something quickly. She needed to divert her sister's attention, and luckily, the perfect scapegoat came to her mind. "I had been wondering, has Death changed, or is he still neglecting his duties?" Lachesis asked her older sister in a casual tone. Atropos almost growls. "He is even worse. Now was her chance. I was thinking, perhaps you should try a different approach, since complaining to Hades didn't work, nor did giving constant reminders to Death." Atropos looks at her with a wary expression. Lachesis becomes flustered. "Never mind. It was just a thought." "What did you have in mind? What do you think I should do? At this point, I will listen to any suggestions." "Perhaps invite him here, and have a heart-to-heart." Atropos's eyebrows rise to her forehead. "You want me to call Death here, to Mount Olympus? Into our palace?" she asks, incredulous. "Would I be inviting him for drinks and discussing our affairs while sipping on nectar and ambrosia?" Lachesis blushed. "That is exactly what I am proposing, if you will hear me out. Perhaps a change of scenery would do him good. The mortal war has been raging on for some time. Perhaps he needs a break from the doom and gloom. Mount Olympus will be the perfect distraction. And I can ask him about Nat's curse," Lachesis thought secretly. Atropos ruminated over her proposal, and Lachesis felt a spark of hope. "Will you consider my idea?" Lachesis pressed again. "Might as well," Atropos said with a sigh. "I have nothing to lose at this point." "And I have much to gain," Lachesis thought, delighted. "It will work out great, sister," Lachesis said. "Trust me on this one." Atropos gave a grim smile and didn't contradict her. Lachesis was brimming with excitement. The goddess could not find anything about Nat's true identity, neither from himself nor from the archives, but she had given up on that now. It didn't matter to her any more who he was. However, this task was much more important. She could not fail now. Today was the day she would talk with the god of death and plead with him to lift Nat's curse. She felt optimistic about her chances of success and was prepared to use all of her charms if necessary. She was a fate. Surely she would have something that Death would be interested in. Lachesis took an unusually long time to prepare herself, indulging in a milk bath infused with rose petals. As she combed her long hair, Lachesis tried to imagine what it would be like when Nat didn't have the curse and smiled. This would be the greatest gift for Nat, and for us, she thought. Then he won't be afraid to be with me completely. A happy sigh escaped her lips. It was afternoon, and both Atropos and Lachesis waited for their highly anticipated guests to arrive. Lachesis glanced out the window, engrossed in her thoughts about Nat, and was startled by the sight of an ominous dark cloud. It loomed just beyond, an eerie sight among the otherwise pristine blue skies of Mount Olympus. "What is that?" she said aloud. Atropos cast a single glance toward the subject of her attention and responded, "It is him. Death has arrived. But I don't understand why he is hovering outside like a bat. I will bring him inside before he terrifies the neighbors." The sisters had all agreed that only the eldest two would meet the god of death, as Clotho was too young and impressionable. That meant that it was Lachesis waiting by herself in the great hall while Atropos went to get him. The seconds passed slowly until she heard them in the hallway. The sight of the hooded god sent shivers down her spine, as did the scythe he held in his left hand. He was tall, but his deadly weapon was towering a meter from his head, and the curved blade reached to the floor in a sweeping motion. It was odd, but Lachesis felt as if he were staring straight at her from under his hood. "You can keep your weapon in this hallway," Atropos sneered. "We do not allow weapons in the Great Hall." For once, Lachesis was glad of her sister's bossy temperament. Whatever the god of death thought of her command, he didn't utter a word, but quietly placed his scythe by the entrance. He had to fold his dark wings in order to fit inside the room. "This is my younger sister, Lachesis," Atropos announced. Lachesis gave him a slight nod.
The youngest is Clotho, but she won't be joining us today. Once again, there was an eerie silence from him. Lachesis felt another chill creep down her spine. How could she bring herself to speak with him? His mere presence overwhelmed her. I must be brave. I am doing this for Nat. I am doing this for our love. Atropos was unaware of the chaos raging inside her sister. She looked around impatiently, as if waiting for something. Where are the automatons when you need them? She grumbled. They should have arrived by now with our food and beverages. What is taking them so long? Lachesis smiled inwardly. It had been her doing. That morning, she had been the one who ordered the automatons to pluck yellow leaves from the bushes. The gardens on Mount Olympus remained evergreen, and she had sent them on a pointless task. The diversion worked as Atropos stood up to go search for the automatons. This was the moment she had planned for. As soon as her older sister left, Lachesis took it as her opportunity to talk to the god of death. Despite her fears, she leaned forward and whispered to him. His attention directed towards her, and she saw a set of eyes gazing at her from under the hood. His wings remained affixed on his back like a permanent structure. She couldn't help but compare her wings, which were luminous like pearls with streaks of silver, while his were shrouded in shadows. Up close she noticed they were not just black, but shimmered in shades of blue, black, and purple. They are beautiful, she thought, oddly mesmerized. Lachesis shook her head to clear her thoughts. Why was she staring at his wings? She didn't have time to waste. Her older sister could return at any moment. I didn't want to say this in front of my sister, but can I ask you a question? Death nods imperceptibly from under his hood. The god of death was not used to company. He shifted uncomfortably, absent-mindedly playing with the sleeves of his cloak that was draped in shadows. At least he was willing to listen. Do you remember all about the mortals that you meet? Death nods again. Lachesis takes a deep breath and asks, I wanted to ask you about a mortal named... The goddess stopped as soon as she catches a glimpse of his wrist. Her face turned pale, seeing a skeletal hand poking out from under his robes. A sudden wave of dizziness struck her. Those ridiculous automatons were scattered all over the garden, Atropos said, coming back into the great hall. There must be something wrong with their mechanism. Are you all right, Lachesis? Her older sister had returned at the worst possible moment and saw her face. Of course, Atropos' sharp eyes wouldn't miss her reaction. I am fine. I think I need to rest a bit, Lachesis said, her voice shaking. She couldn't get the image of Death's hand out of her head. Atropos nodded. Lachesis felt a set of eyes watching her from under Death's cloak, concerned. I am sorry. It seems like my sister is unwell, Atropos said to him. Perhaps we can reconvene our conversation at a better time? Death nods and immediately rises to stand up. No, I think I will be all right, Lachesis protests weakly, but neither Death nor her sister seem to believe her. After giving one final look at Lachesis, he vanishes into a dark cloud outside the window and then completely. The god of death had not forgotten to take his scythe with him. It must be his aura affecting you, Atropos said grimly, once the god of death had left the palace. His aura? He is the god of death, while you are the goddess of life. You must be sensitive to his kind of magic. Perhaps. Lachesis would agree to anything her sister said, as long as she didn't ask any more questions. Maybe it was his curse, she muttered under her breath. Her older sister overheard her muttering. His curse? That is not possible. Lachesis' heartbeat quickened. What do you mean? Death cannot place a curse on anyone. He has sworn his allegiance to Hades, and the king of the underworld would not allow such a thing under his rule. That cannot be true, Lachesis said, confused. Why are you so surprised? Do you know something? Atropos asked sternly. Has death placed a curse on someone? You must tell me immediately. No, Lachesis said quickly. I mean, I don't know anything of the sort. Atropos looked at her closely, not believing her words. I think I should go rest now, Lachesis said. Yes, of course, Atropos said. Her sister will no doubt ask a million questions later. She would have to deal with her interrogation when the time comes. Right now, Lachesis had a lot on her mind.
Lachesis had a revelation about death. She came to realize that Nat had been deceiving her about the curse, and at that moment, she understood something her heart dared not speak openly. The goddess was astounded that she didn't figure it out sooner, but then again, love had made her blind. Lachesis resolved to be courageous and confront Nat about the truth when they met later that night. It was time for all his secrets to be unveiled. Lachesis had intended to control her temper, to engage in a civilized conversation with him to uncover the truth. However, as soon as she laid eyes on him, anger consumed her. How could someone with such a divine countenance deceive her? Her heart was in mourning. Sensing that something was amiss, Nat cautiously asked, "How are you?"
"Couldn't be better, thanks to you," she coldly retorted. "When were you going to tell me?"
"Tell you about what?" he asked innocently. Lachesis growled in frustration and sparks emanated from her hands. Nat stepped back, surprised at her outburst. "Whoa, what was that for?" "For lying to me. You said you had a condition." He was still staring at her with concern. "Why are you so angry, goddess? What happened?"
"Drop the act, Nat. Or should I say Thanatos?" Instead of being guilty that he was caught, Death smiled as if he was relieved and a great burden had fallen off his shoulders. It only infuriated Lachesis that much more. "Even your image was a lie," Lachesis said. "Stop hiding yourself behind a mortal body." The god of death complied with her request, stepping closer and unveiling his true form as Thanatos. Lachesis couldn't help but gasp at his towering presence, standing nearly a foot taller than her. Raven wings extended from his back, while a shadowy cloak draped over his imposing figure. He was missing his deadly weapon, the monstrous scythe, and even though she was already well aware of its appearance, his left hand was still gloved. Thanatos kept the hood of his cloak down, allowing her to gaze upon his face, the very same beautiful face that had betrayed her. "I did as you asked, goddess," Thanatos spoke with the same enchanting voice, only this time his words carried an ancient magic. "I use that body to blend in with the mortals until it is time for me to reap their souls. I wanted to avoid being seen by anyone accidentally." It was a weak explanation, and he was well aware of it by the look in his eyes. "You said your work was in transport, that you move people across the border," the goddess exclaimed. "I ferry souls across to the underworld," Thanatos said, nodding his head. "How is that the same?" "So, I might have stretched the truth a little?" "A little?" she asked, exasperated. "You told me about your family. Were they all lies too?" The taste of betrayal made the words feel bitter on her tongue. "No, I did not lie about them." His words were calm and an affront to the storm raging in her soul. "I told you I called my brother Sleepy, which I do. He is the god of sleep, Hypnos. I mentioned people were terrified of my mother's dark nature, which they should be, for she is Nyx, the goddess of night." Lachesis felt like she was tearing up inside. "You think what you did was right? Just because you told me half-truths doesn't mean you didn't deceive me." For once, he seemed apologetic. "No, what I did wasn't right, but I hope that once you think over everything I did and say, you will not hate me." Lachesis huffed angrily. Death looked at her like he found her anger adorable, which made her even more mad. "So you found out? How?" he asked in a low voice. How did he have the nerve to ask her that question? "I am sure you must be bursting with glee, knowing how long it took me to figure it out. It must have really bolstered your ego to see what a fool I am." Concern washes over his features. "No, not at all. I'm just glad I don't have to pretend anymore. I was going to tell you." "When?" "Right now," he said, "but you beat me to it." He gave a sheepish grin. "How did you get the letters into my room?" Lachesis blushed at the thought of him being there. However, she couldn't understand why she hadn't been able to sense his presence. "You didn't use Daedalus's automatons, did you?" "No. Why?" Thanatos asked. Lachesis let out a breath of relief. "Because they are useless and don't follow commands properly. They probably would have delivered the letters to Atropos instead." Thanatos appeared shocked, which meant that he had indeed thought of using them. Then how did you get the notes inside the palace? The goddess asked.
Thanatos hesitated before answering. I got help from your younger sister. Lachesis felt her world tilt. Clotho? Her Clotho? Sensing her turmoil, Thanatos said, She and my younger brother are friends. This new revelation, that her sister had a friend, added to the goddess's growing list of things she didn't know. What else don't I know? Her lips trembled and her emotions were in disarray. That is everything, I swear, Thanatos said. I was really going to tell you today. Stop with the lies, Lachesis said. I am done with you. Lachesis, please, listen to me, Thanatos pleads. She hated how much her heart thrilled from hearing her name coming from his lips. I think you should leave before I say something I will regret. The goddess turned her back towards him. I am leaving now to respect your wishes, but I am not giving up on us, Thanatos said, echoing the promise she had made to him earlier. How things were so different now. After a few moments, Lachesis heard the soft fluttering of wings and he was gone. Was she wrong to be so angry with him? After all, she didn't even offer him a chance to explain. No, it was the right decision. She was too angry to believe anything he would say, or be able to think rationally. Perhaps, when she cooled down a bit, she would give him one chance. But it would be the only chance he gets. Chapter 7. Foolish Hearts. The goddess reluctantly agreed to meet him again, but she kept her guard up. Determined to protect herself, she vowed to listen only to what was essential, and not succumb to his charms. Before you say a word, I would like the thread of fate back, Lachesis demanded. I am afraid I can't do that, Thanatos replied. I already gave it to someone. Lachesis's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Who did you give it to? To Macaria, Thanatos admitted. It was as if a lightning bolt struck her. Her thoughts spun in a whirlwind. Who was Macaria? Was she his lover? Was she the real reason for their initial encounter? Overwhelmed with emotions, Lachesis felt her heart shatter. How could he betray her in such a way? Her heart screamed out in anguish. Lachesis tried to keep her voice calm. Is she immortal? Thanatos nods. The goddess couldn't take the hurt anymore and burst out. What does Macaria have that I don't? Lachesis asked with tears in her eyes. She hated how her voice sounded so weak and pathetic. Thanatos looked at her quizzically. 4 legs and a tail, he replied. Huh? So, you were into those things? She asked amidst mid-sobs. The confusion must have been clear on his face, because Nat laughed loudly. His laugh still made her heart go crazy. Are you laughing at me? Lachesis asked, offended. I am sorry. I shouldn't, but it is really very comical. I fail to see the humor, Lachesis said with bitterness. You are in love with another. Yes, I am in love with Macaria, but I forgot to mention that Macaria is my cat, a very mortal black cat. You gave the thread of fate to a cat? The goddess asked skeptically. Was he lying to her again? Thanatos must have sensed her distrust, for he said, If you don't believe me, why don't you see it for yourself? Thanatos led the way, with the goddess following closely behind. He had transformed into his mortal form, prompting Lachesis to do the same. Having never needed to alter her appearance before, she felt oddly confined in her new, frail limbs. How do mortals tolerate such a form? She wondered. Shaking her head, she scolded herself for entertaining such thoughts. After all, it's not like they had any choice in the matter. The god of death unfailingly kept the glove on his left hand whenever he met her, regardless of the form he assumed. This hurt her more than it should have. Thanatos didn't trust her. He never trusted her. Thanatos came to a halt in front of a modest villa, his dwelling in the mortal realm. Lachesis couldn't help but wonder what his true home looked like. As someone who had never set foot in the underworld, the goddess could only speculate. Perhaps it was a magnificent palace, or even a dank cave. Thanatos sighed. This is it, he said, stating the obvious. He opened the door and gestured for her to go inside. The villa was almost bare of furnishings. There was no ornate pottery or paintings,
Nothing that could reveal this as a home. Because it isn't, she thought. The only bright spot in Death's bare villa was the corner dedicated to the cat. It was more like a shrine, offering all the comfort and boxes a feline could desire. "Macaria," he called. "I am home." The goddess fully expected a raven-haired beauty with a sultry voice to answer back, but instead heard the pitter-patter of small animal feet as they neared. The cat had been lounging on her plush bed in the corner when her owner called her. She gave a small, puzzled purr upon seeing the goddess standing with him. True to his words, the goddess noticed the thread of fate on the creature's neck, brilliantly contrasting against its black fur, as if it had always belonged there. Lachesis crossed her arms over her chest. "At least you didn't lie about the cat," she said. Thanatos gave a sigh of relief. "There are few who do not fear me, but I remain terrified of your judgment." Lachesis didn't say a word to him, but addressed the cat instead. "He is hopeless, but what about you, cat?" The kitty came close to her. She purred loudly and rubbed her body against Lachesis's ankle. Then she lay on her back, exposing her belly, and batted her paws in the air. "Clever kitty, I see how you changed your fate, by making friends with Death himself. But are you now trying to seduce one of the fates?" Lachesis said, smiling. "You think you can win me that easily?" The cat listened attentively, her bright green eyes focused, before darting out of sight. Lachesis glanced at Thanatos, who simply shrugged. Moments later, the feline re-emerged, a small banana plushie clenched in her mouth. She dropped the toy at the goddess's feet and gave a soft meow. Death appeared to be struggling with his emotions. "Could you please explain the meaning behind this?" the goddess asked, lifting the tiny toy. He cleared his throat. "That is her favorite thing in the entire world. She is giving it to you as her offering." "I understand." Lachesis couldn't help but feel moved. This wasn't an ordinary small creature, but a master manipulator. She was pulling the strings here, not fate. Lachesis crouched down, scratching the cat affectionately behind the ears. "Thank you. I gratefully accept your offer. Can you please keep the toy safe for me?" The cat purred joyfully, swiftly snatching her prized treasure away before the goddess could change her mind. Thanatos looked at the retreating tail of the cat, surprised. "I haven't made up my mind yet," the goddess warned, seeing his expression. "It will depend on what you will tell me." "I suppose that is only fair." Thanatos took a deep breath. "When I first got Macaria, she was just a small kitten. I had to learn everything very quickly regarding feeding and what she needed to survive." "Was she the reason you were often late?" Thanatos nodded in response. "Tropos noticed, unfortunately, despite my best efforts." "What made you keep the cat?" "I found her on the brink of death. Mortals had thrown her away because of her black fur, seeing her as a bad omen." Lachesis couldn't help but gasp. "That is terrible," she said sadly. "It momentarily laid bare the inhumanity that dwells within humans," Thanatos said. "I stayed and waited for the moment I would have to collect her soul, but it never came. I can never forget the fierce determination with which she fought for every breath. Selfishly, I even offered to take her pain away, but Macaria looked at me with those piercing green eyes of hers and growled. Imagine my surprise at this little creature who didn't fear the god of death, who did not cower before me like countless mortals, and even gods." Lachesis placed a hand on her chest. "In that moment, she stole your heart." "Yes," Thanatos replied. "What remained, I gave to you." Lachesis was so lost in her thoughts she barely noticed what he had just revealed. Such a brave, beautiful cat. The goddess understood why Thanatos loved her so. They were kindred spirits, both outcasts and shunned by society. Their mere sights were considered a harbinger of bad omens. Her heart melted a little. It was no wonder Thanatos didn't let anyone near him. But Macaria changed that, despite his fears. Lachesis vowed to break the final barrier he had placed around his heart. "You have convinced me. Rather, the cat has charmed me completely," Lachesis said. Thanatos' smile was mesmerizing. Ecstatic, he tried to say something, but Lachesis interrupts him before he can. "There is still one question you will have to answer me." "What is it?" Thanatos asked, his eyes brimming with hope. "Do you trust me?" she asked. "Of course I do." "No, answer me truthfully. Do you trust me completely?" the goddess asked. He looks at her, puzzled. Lachesis reached for the glove in his left hand, but he tensed up in response. She curls her hand into a loose fist. I thought as much, she said, disappointed. The goddess of life takes a step away from him, furthering the distance between them. Thanatos, the god of death, you must decide. Will you choose fear, or will you choose to trust me? She had spoken with anguish, but Thanatos kept his gaze downward, refusing to meet her eyes. Lachesis felt her heart break yet again, realizing he wouldn't give the answer her heart longed to hear. His silence had spoken volumes. Without uttering a word, she understood his choice. With a heavy heart, the goddess unfurled her wings and took flight, soaring into the skies, not caring about who might see her. Before a single tear could trickle down her cheek and touch the ground, Lachesis vanished into the night. Despite her best attempts, the goddess found herself unable to escape the overwhelming darkness. Chapter 8. Atropos' Judgment. When Lachesis returned to the palace, it was early morning. She hoped her sisters were still in their rooms, so imagine her shock at seeing them waiting for her in the great hall. Atropos was pacing the room like an enraged lioness, and Clotho sat timidly in one corner. The goddess tried to wipe away any signs of heartache and sadness from her face, and greeted her sisters with a smile. However, her older sister did not notice her greeting, and continued muttering to herself and pacing the room. So Lachesis quietly went and sat next to her younger sister. What is the matter with Atropos? Lachesis asked her younger sibling. I am not sure, but she said that the calculations were not making sense, Clotho replied. She has been up most of the night. Lachesis' heart fluttered anxiously in her chest. Her sister knew about the threads. Atropos finally looked at her and seemed startled to find her there. Lachesis, where have you been? She asked. I had gone for a stroll in the garden, Lachesis lied. It is good that you are here, Atropos said with a smile. Lachesis breathed a little easier, knowing that she wasn't in trouble. Her sister wouldn't be smiling if she was angry with her. I was about to call a family meeting, the oldest Fate said. What is it about? Lachesis said. This is about Thanatos, Atropos said. Lachesis nibbled at her lower lip. Did her sister find out about them? What about him? She asked cautiously. Death has been acting strangely, and I want to know why. Where does he disappear to? Who is he meeting in secret? So her sister didn't know. Yet, but she was getting closer. I think you are worrying too much, Lachesis said, her voice shaking a bit. It could be nothing at all. Atropos shook her head. He is hiding a big secret, and I will not rest until I know what it is. Lachesis' intuition filled her with a grim foreboding. Why is she not letting go of this topic? Her younger sister must have felt the same thing, for she asked, What do you fear, Atropos? Can you tell us? Atropos took a deep breath as if bracing themselves, before revealing the truth. I believe death has switched allegiances. It is my belief that he is now working for someone else. Lachesis could never, in her wildest imagination, have expected her sister to say something like that. What was Atropos thinking? You seem certain about this? Lachesis asked. Could it all be a grave misunderstanding? I am certain, Atropos replied firmly. Lachesis considered the possibility that perhaps she didn't know as much about Thanatos as she thought, even if her heart didn't agree. How? Do you have any proof? His actions provide ample proof, Atropos said. Despite Hades' warning, he has remained undeterred, leading me to believe that Thanatos no longer considers himself bound by the oath to the king of the underworld. It seemed far-fetched, but Lachesis wanted to prod more and learn about her sister's thoughts. Who else could he be working with? Lachesis asked, concerned. Atropos looked at her grimly. His siblings. His siblings? Yes, his siblings. Among them, death has been the least troublesome, Atropos said. However, if the god of death has changed his allegiance and joined them, it will spell disaster for the world. How? Clotho exclaimed. Thanatos would increase suffering with Oasis. With Moros, he could bring doom. With Eris, there will be more strife. But the most worrisome scenario of all would be if he were working for the bloodthirsty Charis. In that case, he would only bring violent deaths to all living beings. This was wrong. Atropos has it all wrong. This was even worse than she feared. If I don't stop her now, she will hurt Thanatos, Lachesis thought. She tried to reason with her oldest sibling. Would Hades know about this? Wouldn't he be able to sense something? Atropos shakes her head. Death also has Apati, god of deception, to aid him. That can't be true, Clotho said. He can't be bad. Clotho was terrified and was shaking. Atropos looked at her younger sister and said in a soft voice, Do not worry, my sister. I won't let anything bad happen. What are you going to do? Lachesis asked, terrified. I am going to stop Thanatos before he harms anyone. Her older sister had already decided and had called this meeting solely to inform them. Atropos, picking up her sword, was about to leave when Lachesis cried, Wait! Didn't you listen to what I just told you? Atropos looked annoyed. I cannot wait. I have to warn the other gods before something terrible happens. You can't go. Thanatos has done nothing wrong. Atropos narrowed her eyes. And how would you know that? You don't even know the god of death. I know him, Lachesis said in barely a whisper. Her older sister stops dead in her tracks. What did you say? I said I know him, Lachesis exclaimed. I know him well. Since when do you know him? Atropos asked. Do you know what you are saying? We are lovers, Atropos, Lachesis said, barely meeting her eyes. Clotho gasped, while Atropos looked thunderstruck. Have you lost your mind? She asked in a dangerously low voice. I have lost my heart to him. This time she looked her oldest sister straight in the eyes, and her voice didn't waver. I am in love with the god of death, and he is in love with me. This is even worse than I feared, Atropos exclaimed. He has seduced you in order to gain access to the threads of life. She gasped. It was him that broke into the archives. He must have found the opportunity when he was here. No, that is not true. Lachesis tried to explain they had never met inside the palace, and only saw each other in the mortal realm, but her sister was not listening. I must put an end to his plans now, Atropos exclaimed. Sister, why aren't you listening to what I'm saying? Lachesis asked in despair, but Atropos disappeared without answering. One moment her sister was there, and the next she was gone. Atropos had manipulated time, slowing it down to swiftly slip away before Lachesis could stop her. The goddess heard someone sobbing beside her, her younger sister. During the argument with Atropos, Lachesis had nearly forgotten she was there. Clotho's lower lip quivered, and a tear trickled down her cheek. It's all my fault. No, it's not. The blame falls entirely on me, Lachesis said softly. Clotho shook her head, tears flowing down her face. Will she hurt Thanatos? She asked. Will they fight? Lachesis gently wiped the tears away from her younger sister's cheek. I will not let that happen, little one. Go inside and do not worry. I will find them, the goddess reassured her, although uncertain of how she would accomplish this daunting task. Clotho obediently listened to her and went inside without a word. Lachesis hurriedly made her way to the gleaming golden gates. Summoning her wings once she was outside, with no idea of where to go, the goddess descended to the mortal realm, hoping to find Atropos before it was too late. The goddess followed the sound of the screams. Crowds of mortals below her scrambled in a state of frenzy, desperately trying to flee from an unseen threat. Changing her appearance to fit in, she approached one of them and inquired, What is happening? Why is everyone afraid? The mountain has awakened. It will bury us alive, the mortal exclaimed, overcome by hysteria. The goddess looked in the direction where the crowd was pointing, and saw the dark cloud over the mountain peak, with lightning bolts crackling in its midst. The ground quaked with each thunderous strike, amplifying the chorus of shrieks. It could only be her sister. She had found them. Lachesis swiftly flew to the mountain, recognizing it as the forge of Hephaestus, the god of fire. As she arrived, a terrifying scene unfolded before her. Her sister, with her sword in hand, was engaging in a fierce battle with the god of death, whose shadowy cloak deflected her attacks. The mountain consumed their immense power, intensifying the fiery glow of its furnace like a ravenous beast. Hephaestus was nowhere to be found, but it was not like him to leave his colossal forge unguarded. "Stop, Atropos!" Lachesis cried, but the deafening roar of the winds drowned her voice. The two continued their fierce battle, and the goddess looked on helplessly. Lachesis fervently wished for the blacksmith to return. Where was he? Although his tools laid scattered about, both Hephaestus and the Cyclops who aided him were absent. What would the god of fire do once he was here? Would he stop her sister or Thanatos? Hephaestus was renowned for crafting weapons and armor for the gods, including the thunderbolts for her father Zeus. Could he summon Zeus to this chaotic scene? The consequences would be catastrophic for Thanatos, and potentially equally incriminating for her sister. It would stain her untarnished reputation among the gods. The goddess heard a rumbling and mistook it for another tremor, only to realize that Hephaestus had returned. Flames flickered in his eyes as he exclaimed, "I step away from my smithy for a mere moment and chaos ensues." He glared at the dueling gods, his gaze filled with intensity. "Cease this quarrel. Find another place to squabble. Your presence is frightening the mortals and disturbing my work." In the blink of an eye, both Atropos and Thanatos vanished from sight. Lachesis felt a mixture of both relief and concern. Where had they disappeared to this time? They wouldn't risk frightening the mortals again, she thought, so that meant there was only one other place they would go. Lachesis spread her wings, gliding down and down, journeying all the way to the core of the earth. Finally, she stood in front of the thorny black gates leading to the underworld. Lachesis looked at the eternal gray skies with trepidation. It was her first time in Hades' domain, the realm of the dead. The combination of a rotten and sickeningly sweet smell in the air made the goddess feel nauseated. Thankfully, she wouldn't have to venture far, as her sister and Thanatos were engaged in a fierce battle nearby in a desolate wasteland. Atropos cried out, "Thanatos, god of death, hear my judgment. I deem you unworthy. Forfeit the scythe and your life. You shall not escape your fate." Atropos appeared wild and disheveled, her breathing coming in hard. "Spoken like a true daughter of Zeus," Thanatos muttered. His lip was split open, with a trickle of gold flowing down his chin. It was Ichor, the mysterious life source of the gods, and the final confirmation of his immortality. "Atropos, I have done nothing wrong. I do not understand why you attacked me," he said. "You think I am a fool? I am not like my naive sister to fall for your scheming words. As for your crime, you will no longer torture the souls of the departed. I will put an end to that," Atropos proclaimed. Thanatos seemed perplexed. "So, you know about Lachesis and me? You must know my feelings for her are true. As for the other accusation, you are sorely mistaken." Lachesis felt a pang in her heart, touched by the sincerity in his voice. However, her sister remained unmoved. "First, I will get rid of you and then all your siblings, one by one. I will finally rid the world of their menace and ensure its safety once more," Atropos declared confidently. "You have truly gone mad," Thanatos stated. He'd been deflecting her attacks with his shadows until now, but now that Atropos had threatened his siblings for no reason, including Hypnos, he had to intervene. Summoning his scythe, he warned, "Stop this madness, Atropos. I have not changed my allegiance. I am not what you think I have become." "Yes, I agree," she spat. "You are much worse." The two locked eyes with venom. Atropos and Death engaged in battle, lightning and thunder striking as they clashed. Atropos swung her sword, but despite his threat earlier, Death only blocked her attacks. He cried out in pain as Atropos' sword cut through his hand, severing one of his fingers. Lachesis cried out, "Thanatos!" Hades suddenly appeared, standing before them. "That's enough," he said. Atropos glanced at him briefly, undeterred. Ignoring the warning from the king of the underworld, she lunged forward and Lachesis let out a gasp. Hades' voice echoed around them. "I said, that's enough." He snapped his fingers together, sending Atropos and Thanatos flying in opposite directions. Even Lachesis felt the impact of his magic, stumbling backwards. Death groaned from the ground, murmuring, "Hades, you should have come to me, Thanatos. Your brother Hypnos informed me of what was happening. Just in time," Hades reproached. He appeared deeply disappointed in both of them. Atropos stood up while Thanatos struggled to get to his feet. "Hades, you must know the truth of what death is up to," she pleaded. "I know everything," Hades replied with contempt. Atropos interrupted, perplexed. "You don't understand." "No, goddess, it is you who doesn't understand." Hades interrupted. "I have spoken with Hypnos and your sister, Clotho." "Clotho?" Atropos questioned, confused. "She spoke to you?" "Yes, your youngest sibling," Hades explained, his voice softer now, seeing her reaction. "Perhaps it is time for you to start listening." Lachesis wanted to rush to Thanatos' side, but her pride and concern for her sister's feelings held her back. In her hesitation, Hypnos arrived by his brother's side. He had appeared shortly after Hades did. Hypnos bore a strong resemblance to his brother, albeit with unruly hair. In contrast to Thanatos, his eyes lacked the same softness. Instead, they were a much darker shade, reminiscent of a moonless night sky, and at that exact moment, they were fuming with anger. The god of sleep helped his older brother up, supporting him with one shoulder. Hypnos glared at Hades. "This is your fault." Hades was taken aback by the accusation. "How is it my fault?" "It was only a matter of time before either Thanatos or Atropos snapped," Hypnos rebutted. "Tell the god of war to stop. Tell that nephew of yours that the mortal war has gone on long enough." He emphasized nephew with venom in his voice. "I will speak to Ares," Hades promised. Hypnos remained skeptical. "What will you do when he doesn't listen? Knowing him, he most certainly won't." The king of the underworld sighed. "I will also talk to my brother Zeus. I understand your frustration. We have had an influx of souls, and the underworld is getting overcrowded because of his son's overzealousness." Hypnos glared at him. "Why don't you say it as it is? Ares is a bloodthirsty fiend." "I hear what you're saying, god of sleep," Hades acknowledged. "Your concern for your brother is admirable." Hypnos wasn't finished. "My brother won't ferry souls anymore until you fulfill your word. Let's see how much fun Ares has with a war where no one dies." Thanatos groaned in protest, but his younger brother hushed him. "It is time, brother, for someone to speak up, even if you won't." Hades' eyes widened in surprise at Hypnos' ultimatum. He silently nodded, maintaining his impartial position without saying a word. Lachesis felt a surge of pity for the king of the underworld. It mustn't be easy to keep all the egos and personalities of the gods in check, and despite his efforts, Hades often went unnoticed. She wouldn't want to be in his position, overseeing the management of the underworld and tending to the breathless dead, not even for all the power in the cosmos. Amidst the commotion, no one had been paying attention to Atropos, not even Lachesis, who was distracted by the conversation between Hades and Hypnos. The cutter took out a set of divine scissors, and as she spun her hand, a golden thread wrapped around her arm. It was Thanatos' life cord, and the oldest fate was inches away from cutting it off, ending his life. Before she could take the devastating step, however, ivy wrapped around her body, immobilizing her. Glowing flowers erupted on the lush tendrils, heralding the arrival of the spring goddess and the queen of the underworld. Persephone stood behind her and whispered in her ears, unheard by the others. "You do not want to do that, Atropos. Not unless you want to sever your sister's love along with it." The eldest fate disregarded her warning and attempted to manipulate time in order to complete what she had begun. But unfortunately, her efforts were in vain. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "This is my domain, and here your magic will always defer to mine," the spring goddess said. Atropos attempted to break free of the ivy binding her body, but was kept firmly in place. "I know you feel humiliated and angry, but this is not the path to take," Persephone said gently. The spring goddess's kind words finally got through to Atropos. They made her stop and listen. "What am I doing?" Atropos shuddered, and her scissors fell out of her trembling hands, dropping to the ground. She finally broke free of the anger that had overtaken her reason. Persephone picked up the scissors and returned them to Atropos. Overwhelmed by shame, Atropos could not bring herself to meet Persephone's eyes. "We all make mistakes and do things we're not proud of," the goddess of spring said kindly. "But do not allow your temper to betray you again." This was both advice from a benevolent goddess and a warning. "What will my sisters think of me?" Atropos asked, ashamed. "Do not worry, for they will not know. This remains between the two of us," Persephone said with a smile. The queen of the underworld vanishes with that promise, before her husband or any of the other gods noticed her presence. The entire interaction happened within a split second, as Atropos, in her anger and distressed state, had slowed down time. Although Atropos still felt shaken and embarrassed, she had finally calmed down. Putting her scissors back and standing with bare hands, she faced the others. Hades had been lecturing for the past minute, and she caught the last snippet of it. "Until the two of you work this out, you are both suspended from your responsibilities. Until the two of you work this out, you are both suspended from your responsibilities," he said. "Suspended?" both Thanatos and Atropos exclaimed together. "Then who will take our place?" "I will," Hades replied. Everyone looked at him in disbelief, which caused Hades to become affronted. "I am the king of the underworld, and ruler of the dead. I am more than capable," he muttered. "Who will look after your kingdom while you are away?" Hypnos asked. "Persephone will rule in my stead, while I ferry souls," Hades replied, though he didn't seem too keen on the idea of being separated from his wife. Atropos sighed. "That won't be necessary. We will work things out between us." She looked towards Thanatos, who was still being held up by his brother, and he nodded. "Very well." Hades tried not to let his relief show. "I think it is time that everyone headed back to their homes." With that, the king of the underworld disappeared, as did Hypnos with his brother. Atropos was also nowhere to be found. The only one who remained was Lachesis, and fear of what was to come was paralyzing her next steps. "How will I face my sister?" she wondered. The goddess heard a loud wailing sound in the distance and became startled. Lachesis was all by herself in the realm of the dead, surrounded by terrible creatures who would be drawn to her powers like a moth to a flame. This was no place for her to stay behind and linger. With a heavy sigh, the goddess unfurled her wings and quickly took off towards her home at Mount Olympus. Chapter 9. The Price for True Love. The palace was eerily empty when Lachesis returned. Her footsteps echoed among the empty chambers and on the polished marble floors. Where were Atropos and Clotho? She eventually found them in the most unlikely of places, their cherished spot by the calming waterfalls. It felt as though she had walked into an old childhood memory. This was the first time Lachesis had seen her older sister with her hair down and not pulled into a severe bun. Atropos wore a smile as she braided her youngest sister's hair, while Clotho chattered about something she had seen earlier. Lachesis couldn't quite tell if she was imagining things, or if it was truly happening. It had been ages since she had seen her older sister so calm and still. The dream continued as Atropos welcomed her with a beaming smile. "Look who's here. Clotho and I were just talking about you." I hope it wasn't all complaints, she thought inwardly, but the smiles on her sisters' faces told her the topic had been anything but unpleasant. What is with them? After all that had happened today, am I losing my mind? "The palace is empty," Lachesis said awkwardly. "Perhaps someone should be there as we left the threads unattended." "The automatons will take care of it," Atropos said lazily. As if they will do anything, Lachesis thought. Knowing them, they will probably entertain the intruders by dancing for them. The image of the dancing automatons popped into her mind and nearly made her giggle, but she composed herself. "I guess I can go," Lachesis said half-heartedly. To her surprise, her younger sister jumped up. "I will go," she volunteered. Clotho quickly turned to look at Atropos, who gave her a silent nod. The atmosphere became even more uncomfortable once Clotho had left. Lachesis had no idea how to start the conversation with her older sister. "Atropos, I wanted to apologize," she started. Lachesis stopped mid-apology when she saw her older sister shake her head from side to side. "Come sit near me, sister," Atropos said. Lachesis went towards her sister. "With her hair down, she looks just like me," the goddess thought with a jolt. "I am sorry that I failed you both." "What do you mean?" Lachesis asked. Atropos looked sad. "I wanted to be as mighty as father, and as just and fair as our mother. I tried so hard to do what was right, that I forgot what was good. Instead of being mighty and just, I turned ruthless." "It could have been worse," Lachesis said. Her sister raised an eyebrow. "You could have followed your heart, ignored all reason and sensibilities, and ended up falling in love with the god of death." Atropos nudged her gently with her shoulder. "Stop trying to make me feel better." "I am not," Lachesis said. "I was an idiot." "What will you do now?" her older sister asked. "I am not sure." "Will you talk to Thanatos?" Atropos asked. "I don't know how I feel about meeting him right now," Lachesis replied. "I will have to apologize to him," Atropos said. "I have made a mess of things." "Perhaps not. He will think twice about being late again," Lachesis said. Both sisters looked at one another and burst out laughing. "You were terrifying, Atropos," Lachesis said. "Truly, utterly terrifying. I think even Hades was shaken." "I never felt so much rage. I thought Thanatos was taking advantage of you," Atropos said. "Do you blame me for how I acted?" "Not at all," Lachesis said. "I have to apologize to you, sister." "For what?" "For thinking that you only cared about your work." "I was single-minded about my work until I thought my sister was in danger," Atropos said. "You weren't wrong about me." "I think it is time we forgive one another and promise to do more sisterly things in the future, and not just work." "Agreed." "I think I will go check up with Clotho," Lachesis said. "Are you coming?" "Give me a few more moments to clear my head," Atropos said. "I will join you both soon." "I will see you inside," Lachesis said, nodding. The goddess took her time returning to the palace, and on her way back she picked some peonies from the garden to create a bouquet for her youngest sister. Clotho was a little surprised when she gave her the flowers. "Are these for me?" she asked. "Who else will they be for?" Lachesis replied with a smile. The goddess noticed the automatons scurrying out of the room, pulling a cart of food behind them. "Did we have visitors while I was gone?" Clotho nods her head and blushes. "You have a letter," her sister said, not meeting her eyes. "It is from Thanatos." Lachesis takes it from her hand but doesn't open it. "Was he here?" she asked in a low voice. Clotho shakes her head. "No, Hypnos gave it to me." Her eyes brightened at his name. So her little sister had finally made a friend. "How do you know his brother?" Lachesis asked gently. Her younger sister felt encouraged by her softened tone. "I was daydreaming a lot and was very bored. He came into one of my dreams and we started talking," Clotho replied animatedly. "He mentioned how Thanatos always wanted to meet you, and we thought of a way for you two to meet." Lachesis stays quiet at her confession about the god of death, but remembers how Hypnos had defended his brother. "Hypnos is very brave," she observed. "I saw him speak up to Hades, and he didn't seem the least intimidated." Clotho beams with pride. "He is very smart, too." Lachesis gave a warm smile. Hypnos was certainly wise beyond his years. He never once blamed her sister, but blamed the war for her breakdown. Perhaps he was right about the pressure driving her to act in that manner. Atropos appeared to be more relaxed now than she had been in a long time. "Thanatos is not bad, you know," Clotho says quickly, unable to keep it in any longer. "Hypnos told me that even before the war, his brother had been struggling. He thought it would be a good idea if he talked to you." "Thank you for telling me that," Lachesis said. "I appreciate knowing the truth." "Do you forgive me, then?" Clotho bit her lips nervously. Lachesis pulled her little sister into a hug. "There is nothing to forgive, little one.
I could never be mad at you."
"Are you mad at Thanatos?" she asked.
"I am not sure what I feel at the moment," Lachesis replied truthfully.
"I know you will forgive him," Clotho said with a hopeful air. "You are too kind to stay mad at anyone." Her youngest sister gave her a kiss on the cheek and rushed to show Atropos, who had just entered inside, the flowers that she had given her. Lachesis didn't know if she deserved such praise. She didn't feel too kind at the moment, just conflicted. She turned over Thanatos' letter in her hand and opened it.
"Dear Weaver of Fates, what do you see in our future? Is there forgiveness, or have I lost you forever? I will wait for you. I will wait until there are no more stars left in the cosmos. I will wait until the fates run out of threads. I will wait until the end of time. I may not have a mortal soul, but will you accept my immortal love? I long to hear the answer from your divine lips. I have pondered over your question 1,000,000 times, and I am afraid that it will ultimately consume me. Have mercy on my state. Promise me that you will come. Yours eternally, Thanatos." But despite his plea, Lachesis didn't go to meet him that night, nor the night after. Days gradually turned into weeks, and weeks seamlessly transitioned into months. The goddess didn't know what she expected, but she didn't find Thanatos standing like a dark cloud outside her door. She didn't know what to make of his silence. Was he giving her space, or had he moved on? Even Atropos was working with Thanatos again, yet Lachesis waited, hoping for the ache in her heart to subside. Eventually, overwhelmed by the pain, she mustered the courage to venture out one night to the least likely place she ever thought she would go, without informing anyone of her destination. The night spread out beautifully over the hill, the breeze bringing in memories of the past. Would Crimson Peak become yet another artifact in her long, immortal existence? I took too long, Lachesis thought. He must have stopped waiting for me by now. There was a flapping of wings, and then he stood, like a vision before her eyes. "You came?" Pain and longing broke through his voice. The goddess tried not to shiver upon hearing his agony, for it echoed her own. "You waited," she said simply. "I said that I would," Thanatos said. "Why?" The question had been burning in her mind since the day they met. Thanatos knew immediately what she wanted to know. "You are the antithesis of who I am. You are what I could never be. You are life, my love. No one else can be as beautiful." Lachesis raised an eyebrow. "What about Macaria?" "She is but a mortal creature," he said with sadness in his eyes. "Her life will pass in the blink of an eye." "You will have more time with her than that," the goddess replied. "What do you mean?" "Since she wears the thread of fate, she will enjoy a long, healthy, and happy life." "How long?" "Macaria's soul will be one of the last you transport into the underworld." "Thank you," Thanatos said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I feel I can never thank you enough." Lachesis stayed quiet, but appreciated his words of gratitude. The god of death gazed into her eyes. "Have you forgiven me?" "Yes." "Can things go back to how they were?" he asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because I want more." "What do you want?" "I want to get closer to you, without fearing that you will pull away. Unless that happens, things can never be the same between us," the goddess said. "It will be hard for me," he said. Thanatos eyed his glove with disdain. "I have never hated an object more in my life." Lachesis placed a hand on his glove. "I know it will be difficult, but you have to trust me if you want this to work, if you want us to work." "I understand." Thanatos closed his eyes. "No one said the path to love would be easy, but I would give anything to start all over again." Lachesis nodded, understanding his wish. "Who are you?" she asked. "I am Thanatos, son of the night, Nyx, and brother of Hypnos, god of sleep." "Why did you want to meet me?" "I have been obsessed with you ever since I first existed. How could death not be in love with life? You are the pinnacle of what is forbidden to me, my opposite." "Who else resides in your heart?" "You, and just you," he replied. "And perhaps a small little kitten." "So, a little creature with 4 legs and a tail has conquered the god of death?" Lachesis teased. Thanatos slowly shook his head. "The god of death was vanquished by his heart, twice. First by a small mortal being, and the second time by a divine goddess. The small creature had a strength in her unlike any he had ever seen. Her heart quickened. And the goddess? A beauty that holds no equal. Don't let Aphrodite hear that, Lachesis said. She will make you regret you said that. No threat, no power, nothing will ever make me regret how I feel about you, nor stop me from... Before he could say another word, Lachesis gently covered his mouth, causing the god of death to fall silent, slightly stunned. That's enough, she said, her heart feeling full. The goddess cradled the side of his face, and he leaned into her hand. How long have you waited for a loving touch? Too long, Thanatos replied, his voice strained, and I would have waited forever more, only for you. Tears welled in the goddess's eyes. Do you trust me? I trust you completely, he replied. She extended her hand towards the glove on his left hand and paused. Promise me, Thanatos, no matter what happens, you will not withdraw your hand, the goddess requested. I promise. Lachesis slowly slid the glove off his hand, and she heard him take a sharp intake of breath. She looked at the gaunt hand, further mutilated by her sister's sword and missing a finger. She interlaced her hand with his and experienced a pain unlike she had ever felt before. The goddess let out a small cry, and Thanatos asked helplessly, Lachesis? Despite the pain, she slowly shook her head. A single tear fell down her cheek, and Thanatos wiped it with trembling fingers. Lachesis was still breathing, even if she felt life was leaching away from her. She watched as the skin and muscles melted off her hand, leaving behind a hand to match that of the god of death. He watched in both awe and fear, keeping true to his word and not tearing his hand away. Together we are broken, the goddess said with a smile. Finally, just when she thought she could bear the pain no longer, the hand heals, reforming the sinews and tendons that had just died. They reformed back to the fingertips, and more than that, continued healing through to Thanatos' hand. He stared at his hand, now fully formed. The effect of her magic lasted only as long as Lachesis held on, but for a fleeting moment, Thanatos experienced something that he never thought would be possible. And together we are whole, the god of death replied. Lachesis broke into laughter, and Thanatos did the same. He reached down and kissed her, holding the goddess in his embrace. And together they were whole. Such is the fate of life and death. Two lovers stood atop a secluded hill. Her wings were summoned from the stars, while his from the darkness surrounding them. Together they wove a tapestry of the night sky.
This has been The Three Fates, written by Aisha Urooj, narrated by Alyssa Kane, copyright 2023 by Aisha Urooj, production copyright by Aisha Urooj. The end.